Hey everybody, Aaron Cowan, Sage Dynamics, and this is the Surefire SOCOM Mini 2 suppressor. It's not much of a secret that I'm a big fan of Surefire suppressors in general. I have two of the SOCOM 2 RC2s, and I love them a lot. If someone were to ask me what's your favorite 556/223 dedicated suppressor, I'm going to say hands down Surefire. They also are holding the title of my favorite QD mounting system. That being said, I hadn't used, I should say, at least personally put through a review process, their mini suppressors. What's better than a suppressor? A shorter suppressor that provides you with reasonable sound suppression for general purpose uses on rifle lengths that you can get away with. The SOCOM Mini 2, it's the newest offering, and I say newest relatively speaking, of the SOCOM series, and the Mini being smaller than your traditional SOCOM 2 suppressor length, which means you get a little bit less baffles and a little bit less length, but what you gain is a little bit of maneuverability, but it does limit you in some degree on what kind of rifles you can get away with as far as barrel length goes. Optimal is a 14.5, 16 plus inch. I have it right now mounted on this Tri-Arc centrifuge work gun, and it adds just a little bit length to the 14.5 pinned length of the rifle, which means it's still a very versatile, very maneuverable rifle while providing me with sound suppression. As far as features go, the SOCOM Mini 2 is well positioned to be a smaller, a micro, or a mini type suppressor. I always wanted one of Surefire's, the SOCOM Micros. However, those are unicorns and they're very, very hard to find. So I was pleased when Surefire sent this suppressor out to me to do my review process on. Now, for the review process, my biggest concern was, just putting through the general process, was it going to be able to provide consistent reliability, consistent accuracy compared to, and I generally don't like to do comparisons, but since I have a lot of experience with Surefire's other suppressors, is it going to provide me the same degree of performance that I get from the larger Surefire suppressors, or just in general, am I going to lose a lot of performance versus a full-size suppressor? Now, I knew going into it immediately I wasn't going to get the same degree of decibel reduction, relatively speaking, but was it going to provide me with a can that did not hurt to shoot on a 14.5 or a 16-inch gun, and could I theoretically get away with putting it on an even smaller firearm and still getting a level of sound suppression that would reduce the decibel report to a level that wouldn't cause pain. Now, it's not going to reduce it to hearing safe levels, because technically no suppressor, no traditional suppressor, gives you actual hearing safe. It may give you hearing safe for 1 or 2 shots or for 4 or 5 seconds, depending on the decibel reduction, the size of the can. A lot of different factors go into that. Of course, the environment which you shoot the suppressor in also factors into it. An open field, outdoors on a range, is going to be a lot different than shooting it in, say, a hallway or a bathroom. At 14.5 ounces and 5 inches, the Mini 2 does not add a great deal of weight or length to the rifle you're going to put it on. So if you put it on a 14.5, 16, 18, you're not adding a degree of length or weight that's going to make the rifle more noticeably cumbersome than otherwise. It's going to be a little bit more versatile, a little bit lighter on the muzzle end than if you're using a full-size suppressor. Now, going into the review process, what's the Mini 2 doing for me? Well, material makeup is what you'd expect from Surefire. The coating is what you'd expect from Surefire. And with the Mini 2 over the previous generation of SOCOM cans, I've got that a further recessed end cap, which helps cut down on muzzle signature and blowback to the shooter. Contrary to what some people believe, suppressors do actually have a muzzle signature. There is a muzzle flash there, depending on barrel length and ammo and a couple other variables that factor into that. But during the review process, using the Mini 2 under low light and night vision, the muzzle signature was what I would expect from Surefire, which is not much at all. Barely noticeable to slightly noticeable depending on the muzzle length of the rifle that I was using. Now, during the review process, I did shoot it on 3 different rifles, well, 4 really, which is the 14.5 pinned Tri-Arc centrifuge work gun, the one I'm holding right here, but also using on 12.5 primary weapon systems, which is a long stroke piston gun, and a 16-inch SMOS GFY, and a 12.5-inch ADM machine gun. So I got a lot of versatility as far as barrel lengths, and of course they're mentioning the ADM, which is a registered machine gun, able to put some full auto on it, because Surefire, of course, their suppressors, or almost all of their suppressors, are full auto rated. Of course, the very first thing we're going to do with any suppressor is the burn down, a high frequency rate of fire, 500 rounds as quickly as I can get them through the gun. Generally, you know, any suppressor is going to be able to handle it. Any firearms accessory, muzzle device, rifle, handgun, optic, they're going to be able to handle 500 rounds. And if they don't, then they definitely aren't going to, I'm not going to really go any further than that in the 500 round burn down. What I'm looking for is, are they able to handle a higher frequency of fire? And that's the whole purpose of the burn down. So 500 rounds as quick as I can get them down the range. Here's your burn down. As expected with the shorter suppressor, we lit the candle, we got it glowing a little bit red hot there. But from first to last round, sound attenuation remained exactly what I'd expect. I did do the review, or I should say the burn down on that 14.5, because Surefire kind of recommends 14.5 to be the optimal, 14.5 plus or longer, be the optimal length for the rifle you're going to use the suppressor on. Of course, I have, even in this video, used it on 12.5 and also on a 16-inch, which of course is, you know, longer than 14.5, so that's fine. But using it on the shorter rifle, something I wanted to check out, because can I get away with it? It's not ideal, but can I put it on a 12.5 or 12-inch or 12.85 or, you know, 13-inch or whatever that particular length right in there happens to be, and still get reasonable sound reduction for what I'd call like emergency purposes. If my home defense AR pistol is a 12-inch gun because I found 12-inch to be an optimal length for whatever reason, is the Mini going to provide me with sound reduction that's going to be manageable? Truth is, yeah, it does. Shooting on a 12-inch gun, I didn't notice a huge difference. Now, of course, full disclosure here, I do have hearing damage, so my ears aren't brand new. A person with really good hearing who's taken really good care of their ears and haven't found themselves suddenly, you know, in a situation where, surprise, hearing damage, they may have noticed it be a little bit more spicy than I did. But to my ear, the reduction was manageable. Is it something I'm going to do for, you know, extended periods of time? And not if I want my hearing to stay as good as it is right now, but it's something that I can do. Fired it under closed canopy, indoors, and of course outdoors on a range when I'm away from trees and anything else that's going to bounce back or reflect that noise. Even on the 12.5, suppressor sounded great. Just like I kind of prefaced already, using the can under night vision and under low light conditions, performed great. The muzzle signature is not noticeable. It doesn't cause any serious significant blooming or auto-gating issues on my night vision. Under low light, it doesn't create a great deal of smoke that I then can't necessarily push the gun through or see through with the weapon light activated, unless I'm really on the gas and I'm shooting a high rate of fire. And then, of course, you know, pretty much any suppressor is going to put out enough smoke that you're going to start to get that photonic backsplash, or that light reflection off of that cloud of smoke, and you're going to have to cut the gun down, or you're going to have to move, so you're not blinding yourself or reducing your vision through that smoke. Some of the shorter suppressors, the K or minis or whatever their manufacturer calls them, suppressors I've used in the past have put out a great deal of gas and a significantly more muzzle flash, and that's definitely not something I noticed with the Mini 2. As far as ammunition goes, for the testing process, I used 55 grain Fiochi, which is a pretty common round for me to shoot. I like it. It's a consistent round. It's got good standard deviation, and it's a good all-around purpose training round. But I also shot a lot of 77 grain Black Hills, as well as 75 and 77 grain Gold Dot, because I had a bunch of that laying around, so obviously I cycled that through the gun just for the review process. Duty ammunition generally has better powder in it, so it's going to have less flash, but that Fiochi, you know, you'd expect range ammunition to not have self-defense in mind, so usually the muzzle signature isn't that large of a concern for the manufacturer, so they use different powders, but not an issue. Something Surefire has always prided themselves on is their QD system, their QD collar ratcheting system. And like I said earlier, it remains my favorite QD system out there. There's other good ones, don't get me wrong. But if I had to choose a favorite, it's going to be the Surefire collar system. I like the way the interface works. I like how tight it is. And in the past, on the other Surefire suppressors I've used, the return to zero has been, well, amazing. Is that going to be the case on the Mini 2? Well, let's check it out. Here is a 5-round group fired suppressed on that SMOS GFY. That's a 100-yard group fired on 77 grain Black Hills. One thing that's important to mention is that gun previously had been zeroed suppressed on a Surefire SOCOM 2, the full-size RC2 suppressor. There was no appreciable zero difference between that suppressor and this suppressor. So when I put this suppressor on to make zero adjustments for the purposes of doing the review, I was pleased to find that I didn't have to make any adjustments, which is, I think, a first in my experience. That being said, that's not necessarily going to be typical. Your experience going from one Surefire can to another, you might not notice that they hold the same zero, but I was pleasantly surprised that. That particular rifle generally shoots 1 MOA or better, depending on ammunition. Generally, it shoots better than 1 MOA. Now, of course, the real test is with the suppressor zeroed, if I remove the suppressor, how much of a point of aim, point of impact shift do I have? So, took the suppressor off, fired another 5-round group. I think it would be impossible to not have some kind of shift. However, that shift is so minimal, it's something that's consistent as well. Put the can back on, take the can back off, it's going, in my experience, especially with this particular suppressor in the review process, it would shoot that same deviation every time within reason, relatively speaking, plus or minus maybe half an MOA. So it's something I can trust and it's something I can account for. So if I really, for whatever reason, had to dope for an unsuppressed zero, I could just write that on my data card and dial it in when I took the suppressor off to know that the firearm was then zeroed for unsuppressed fire. Now, putting the suppressor back on, am I going to have a return to zero? So after that group, threw the suppressor back on, fired another 5-round group. And that's what I would call return to zero. I can't really ask for more performance as far as accuracy goes and return to zero and consistency goes out of a suppressor. So just like my experiences with the SOCOM 2, the full-size can, the Mini 2 is performing just as well with a slightly less sound reduction. Now, what makes the suppressor advantageous over other suppressors out there? That really comes down to user's preference. If you don't have a select fire firearm, then you don't necessarily need a full auto rated can. However, in my experience, even with shooting semi-automatic only, full auto rated cans can generally handle use and abuse considerably more well, effectively than suppressors that don't carry that full auto rating. They're not built to the same robust standards necessarily, and generally their coating isn't as well. So whatever the can is coated with, be it Cerakote or Alumahide or whatever they're using to actually coat the suppressor after the manufacturing process is complete, generally not going to be as good, which means you're going to start to burn it off, which could open your can up to corrosion depending on what kind of materials it's made out of. The shorter suppressors are sometimes a little bit more abused by shorter guns. So if you're using a 14.5 or shorter, like I did a 12, especially a 12, shooting on a select fire, it's not something I'd probably want to make a habit of, because I'm going to seriously start to degrade the overall lifespan of that suppressor much faster because of the shorter barrel length, extra gas and powder getting down there. And it's generally going to beat the suppressor a little bit more than it would, or considerably more than it would, depending on barrel length, than I'm going to do on a 14.5 or 16-inch. Many suppressors, I think, are optimal for people who are not going to do an AR pistol, or people who can't do an AR pistol, or people who are not going to do an SBR, or can't do an SBR. For duty purposes, individual officer rifles, this is an optimal suppressor for something that's going to be non-NFA route. So if I wanted a suppressor for my patrol rifle, my 14.5 pin or my 16-inch, but I still needed some degree of maneuverability, or I wanted some degree of maneuverability while running that suppressor, then a suppressor like the SOCOM Mini 2 is something that's going to be high on my list of things to buy. For home defense purposes, if you have a rifle set up for home defense use inside the home, the average hallways and houses, especially, older homes, even newer homes, 2.5, 3 foot wide is generally, the neighborhood you see hallways in. Those 16-inch guns, 18-inch guns can get really, really cumbersome really, really fast when trying to maneuver in those close quarters. Adding a suppressor can preclude or at least reduce the need for throwing on ear pro if you don't have time. And throwing a mini suppressor on the rifle isn't going to increase the length of the rifle significantly enough to make that maneuverability any more necessarily cumbersome within reason than it would be otherwise. So if I had a 14-inch or 14.5 or 16-inch gun set up for home defense and I threw the SOCOM Mini 2 on it, I'm not adding so much length to the rifle that it suddenly went from super sexy gun to Kentucky long rifle. Do you need the Surefire SOCOM Mini 2 in your life? Yeah, just being honest with you. I mean, if you're looking for a suppressor, especially a suppressor that's in the mini category, the K category or the shorter category, then especially for 5.56 223, if you don't have to have a multi-caliber can, there's absolutely no reason whatsoever not to get this suppressor. Not only are you going to be pleased with the muzzle devices that Surefire offers, you're going to be pleased with the overall performance of the suppressor, especially on longer guns. It's still going to give you reasonable hearing reduction on those shorter guns, 14.5 and 12-inch, but you're really going to see it shine on those longer rifles where they generally have less maneuverability overall, or maybe your maneuverability isn't so much a concern of home defense as it is just general purpose on the range. Maybe you're shooting PRS or something like that. You want a suppressor, but you don't want to add 7 inches or 6 inches of length to the firearm over what it already is. The Mini 2 is definitely a good choice for that. As far as QD systems, if you want a suppressor that you can have it host on different rifles, and you're worried about return to zero, with Surefire, that's generally not something you're going to have to worry about. If you zero it, you take the suppressor off, you go away for 6 months, come back, put the suppressor back on the gun, go out and shoot, it's going to return to zero within reason. And that's been my experience consistent with all the Surefire cans that I've shot and the Surefire cans that I have. So if you're looking for a shorter suppressor and you want something that's 223 5.56, you don't really have to look any further than the Surefire SOCOM Mini 2. I'm Eric Allen, Sage Dynamics. Train accordingly.